What do you think about Ryan Day's $13 million estimate for NIL retention costs for Ohio State?
Oh, goodness. It's a good transition there. Thank you, Paul. But it's amazing to hear that, because I believe Billy Napier threw out like a $20 million annual number a couple of weeks ago. And so these are a couple coaches that you're actually hearing. Yeah, cost of living, like dollar amounts to this, because that's big time. Like, we've heard people talk about it NIL, and you hear Nick Saban and everything happen. But now when you have coaches who are actually putting dollar amounts to it, and so you hear 20 million, you hear 13 million, and the way Ryan talked about it, it's like, hey, you take your best 23 players, average out $500,000, probably 2 million for a quarterback, $1 million for an elite rusher, $1 million for a really good offensive tackle. You got receivers, running backs, all this different stuff. Like, it sounds about right. I mean, probably 15 to 20 million sounds about right. So they're going to have to find a way to raise this money. The same way Nick Saban throwing that stuff out there, I think, was a little bit of a warning to college football, but also an endorsement to the boosters to kind of, hey, get on board. I mean, Ryan Day was literally talking to business leaders. It was a business leaders breakfast in Columbus, Ohio. Gene Smith is there, and this is for the sole reason of talking about, partnering with players, hiring players, and figuring out a way to make it all work.
It's a no-brainer that the SEC should move to 9 conference games, isn't it? Or do you think they stay at 8?
I would say it's a no-brainer when you have 16 teams in your conference. You look at TV revenue, and you think that that's going to be a better situation, obviously, there. You're going to get more good games. You're going to have that ability then to make sure that more teams are playing each other, and you don't have a situation where, I believe, LSU hasn't been to Kentucky since 07. Like, there's just so many different things that are out there that teams haven't traveled here or haven't played in so long. So 9 games helps alleviate that. You also have a lot of teams where you have the Georgia Tech, Florida State, Carolina, Clemson. Like, there's a number of games that are, big inter-conference games that are built in. So then you really only have kind of 2 non-conference games. I think that's all right. I think that works. The teams that are pushing back, I guess, on this, or maybe your second-tier conference teams where, hey, would you rather play Alabama or would you rather play Troy or Middle Tennessee State? And I get that, and I understand it, but I think some uniformity in a 9-game conference schedule, I think that works as these conferences begin to balloon to 14 teams and above.
Yeah, and we were discussing this earlier in the week. If for those that would say, hey, well, we're just trying to get bowl eligible, I would say, well, you can continue to cash those checks, and we're going to add to those annual checks from our TV revenue, because the NFL, for instance, didn't add a 17th game because they wanted more football. The networks were willing to pay a boatload more to their current contract. An all-SEC matchup over an extra weekend, what's that worth to ESPN and ABC and the SEC network and everything else? I mean, to me, it's a moneymaker that they can't pass up.
Oh, absolutely. I bet you could argue that extra weekend's worth $5 million per school, maybe more, maybe 7 like that. And so how do you take a look at that with the big game that you're going to have, especially in Texas and Oklahoma? I mean, there's going to be matchups aplenty. And so the 1-7 model, I don't like, because, who are you going to say is your number one rival? And I feel like you're going to leave so many things out. Like, okay, you're going to have Auburn, Alabama, but you're going to have Auburn, or you're not going to have Alabama, Tennessee every single year. You'll have Florida, Georgia, but maybe you don't have Florida, Tennessee, or you're going to have Florida, Bama. Like, you're leaving so many of these games out. So I think if you have 3 and you go to 9, that helps answer a couple questions. Number one, it's more revenue television-wise, but number 2, I think it preserves a lot of what makes college football great, which is, to me, the rivalries and the pageantry and the tradition of those games.
So, Bobby, it's been very predictable with college coaches coming out and saying we got to get a handle on NIL. This wasn't the intent to bring guys in or retain guys from transferring away with money and this and that. I also fully expect Jim Harbaugh to come out soon at a quarterback club meeting and say, we need $15 million if Ohio State needs $13 million in order to retain our roster. What do you think is the level of playing ball that coaches across the country are now willing to do, even if they try to stay separate from collectives, knowing full well that this now is the price of doing business?
Yeah, I hope that Jim Harbaugh comes out and says that. He had some recent comments about NIL and talking about how, he wants to make playing at Michigan a transformational experience, not a transactional experience. And I appreciate that. And I think that can be the case. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to compensate your players and take care of your guys. And so I think that there can be a couple of things that are true. You can have great relationships with your players and still ultimately go out and compensate them. And for the Big Ten, when you look at it, Michigan is and should be right there with Ohio State. And they had a great opportunity to grow on that momentum that they had this year from beating Ohio State, winning the Big Ten, going to the college football playoff. And instead, your coach is trying to leave. And now he sounds like, hey, he doesn't understand name, image, and likeness. And so there's a great opportunity here. The train has left the station. They're going to find a way to tighten this up a little bit, but it's never going to be something where you're literally like putting full-on guardrails on it. And so I don't know if everybody necessarily wants to get on board with that. So if that's the case, you have to live in the world that you've created. And right now, you've created this NIL world, and they've got to find a way to execute in it.